now that we've described the activity and you've had a chance to read your roles, feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Well, I'll open up. My name is Samantha, and I am the Red Cross representative here today. I'm so glad that each of you have been able to take some time out of your busy schedules to join me for this conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you. Before we get started, though, I'd like to just go around and have everyone introduce themselves, just so we know who's all at the table. I'd like to start over here, please.
Okay, I'm Louise, and I'm a manager over at ChemPro.
Wonderful, Louise. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, hi, I'm Steve. I'm the county school administrator.
Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm Ted. I'm the local emergency manager here within this county.
Great. Thanks for being here, Ted.
You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia, and I'm a healthcare administrator at the local senior center.
Okay, great. We'll have a nice diverse group. I'm going to be facilitating our conversation, which means I'm going to try to keep track of what we're talking about and keep us moving along in the process. I may contribute at times, but I'm really also interested in getting as much information out on the table from all of you as possible. The first thing we're going to do is just figure out what issue we want to start with here today. Obviously, dealing with emergencies is very complex. There's a lot we could talk about, but in the limited time we have, where would be the best place to start? So I'm going to open it up to the table and ask you all, where would you like to begin?
Well, we've had discussions in the past, and we've talked about hurricane preparedness, and in my opinion, the community's pretty well prepared for hurricanes. There's typically notice before such an event occurs. We've done a lot of training in schools and also in other areas of the community. We've had experience with hurricanes. We've had 2 in the last 7 years, and the community's responded pretty well. And in those areas where we needed to improve, we troubleshot that and we improved it. My big concern and my role is how would the community respond in the case of a chemical spill? You know, having industry in town here, that's one of those things that you don't get to experience and hopefully never have to experience. But for me, that's a big worry. That's one of those things that keeps me up at night. So I'd like to see us address the issue of a potential chemical spill and how to prepare the community.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ted, for starting us off.
Sure.
I'd welcome other perspectives on issues to talk about.
Well, I'd really like to second what Ted said, because I'm really sort of tired of talking about hurricane planning, and if we're going to get with the Red Cross here and talking about preparedness, this is an area where we really do need to be prepared. Over in New Jersey, they had something like this happen very recently, and it just brings home the fact that it could happen here. So I think whatever we can do to really prepare for that, hopefully something that wouldn't happen, but in case it does, we should be prepared.
Okay, so you agree that talking about the chemical spill would be a place to start?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think also good points have been made on this, and you know, certainly seniors are so vulnerable to different health risks. We hadn't really thought about chemical spills. We certainly have preparedness plans around like relocating of the seniors and things like that. So I actually would be very interested in us exploring this topic further.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
thanks, Alicia.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I do agree with Ted because this has a huge impact. This is something that we wouldn't get notice to. It's a large, vulnerable population that I'm dealing with. We have transportation issues and all other things that we really haven't had the time to look at. I mean, we've been dodging the bullet on something like this for a long time, and
Yeah,
I think now's a good time to really spend some time to talk about it.
Okay, well, I'm pleased that there seems to be some consensus around this issue. I think that's a good, discrete topic we can kind of really sink our teeth into this afternoon. The first step in talking about the chemical spill issue is really to get from all of you what are the underlying interests that are on your minds about why this issue is so important. What I'm going to do is ask that kind of question. I'm going to put it up here on the board, and we're going to be able to refer to it in the next steps of what we're going to be doing here. So I'm going to stand up and get ready to start writing, and I'd welcome anyone to start with whatever interests are on your mind.
Well, safety of the students. how do we, how do we evacuate them? What do we do to ensure that our students are safe when an event occurs?
Okay, the safety of the school children and.
And the staff, the staff,
Mm-hmm.
do we evacuate? Do we, what's our, our plan?
What's the plan? Right, so having a plan in place. Okay.
Yeah, I would also add that we really assess the vulnerability of the community. It's not just the chemical plant proper where there's a risk of a spill. There's also the rail lines coming in and out of the plant,
Mhm.
right, that course through the town,
Mhm.
through the better part of the county that exposes many, many people to potential spills. So I
Okay.
think really assessing and understanding our vulnerability and having concrete plans to keep the community safe.
So it's really vulnerability throughout the county, right?
Yeah,
So
through
looking
the-
at
yeah.
the larger picture.
Yeah, the rail lines go through very highly populated areas in some cases.
Okay, thank you, Ted.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm of course really very concerned about the safety of our seniors.
Mhm.
So I think, how do we minimize the exposure if this kind of event actually happens? And how do we inform our staff about this and making sure that they know what to do in the situation as
Mhm.
well?
And it seems to me, and tell me what you think, it's the staff of the senior center, but it's really anyone who works in the
Certainly.
county where there are people gathered. Sort of a across the board interest in informing, training, educating. Does that sound
Yeah.
about right? So education, training,
Mhm.
okay.
So in
Other
Chempro is very interested, obviously, in the safety of the community. Our
Mhm.
workers live here, our
Mhm.
management team lives here. And we're very interested in having, and I know the entire management team is interested in having us be a part of the solution and not always seen as part of the problem.
Okay. So for you, it's making sure that industry is part of the conversation around.
Well, it's
dealing
about
with this issue.
visibility and changing some perceptions out there that we're always the ones just causing the problem, that we're also very interested in safety and preparedness, and therefore part of any kind of solution that could prevent something like this from happening in the first place.
Okay. So wanting to be part of the solution.
Yep.
Any other interests that are on people's minds?
Yeah, I think the communication, we talk about what is the plan, but I think we have
Right.
to communicate, especially to our parents. Something like this happens, and do we, if we tend to, we want to evacuate, or if we have to shelter in place, I mean, this might be, we might have to change some mindsets of what people are thinking. I mean, when we have a hurricane, we know we evacuate, but, in a situation like this, of course, we don't really know what the plan, I don't think it's been established yet, but whatever plan we come up with really needs to be communicated, and we have to have buy-in from
Mhm.
everyone. It has to be, comprehensive, and we have to have buy-in from the community to be able to execute it.
I'm going to add that here, Steve, just around the education and training component, that it's done in a way that helps people to, as you're saying, really internalize the different, sort of protocols you might be asking people to abide by. So for example, people might think they have to evacuate when maybe they shouldn't. And so how do you know when to do that? So I think
Mhm.
those two seem connected. All right, good list. Anything else on people's minds that we haven't talked about yet?
I think this just fits in, again, as we're talking about this, about the whole preparedness in general. So I
Mm.
think, as I said, we have preparedness plans for our centers, but
Right.
this wasn't part of that. So I think making sure that it fits into, if there are existing plans, how do we expand those to ensure that it includes this issue?
So expanding existing safety plans to include the chemical spill issue. Okay. Now, just because I'm at the end of the page doesn't mean that has to be the end of the interest. I'm happy to put up another sheet unless people feel like this is pretty complete to get us started.
I have one more, and I think you might have brought up a point about resources. You know, my interest, what resources are we gonna be provided?
Okay.
From, the chemical company, from emergency
Mhm.
management.
Yeah.
And how, where those resources are gonna come from, and, to be sure they're vetted and correct.
And are there resources that the Red Cross has? I'm not sure what the answer is to that,
Okay.
beyond
So,
the county services.
so
I'd be interested in-
resources writ large.
Exactly.
Resources from the
Mhm.
county,
Yeah.
resources from industry, resources from nonprofits.
Exactly.
And I fit another line on.
You got it.
All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put this up on the wall, and we'll be using this as we move forward. Okay. Well, thanks for that. That's a good start to our conversation. A lot of good interest on that sheet. So the next thing that we're gonna do is, while it would be fine to just go right here into developing options, the intermediate step is to figure out how are we going to evaluate the options we come up with. And a way to start that conversation is to think about criteria. What are the limits or the boundaries we might want to put on ourselves to be able to decide which options are going to make sense? So for example, we talked about resources. The county may only have $1 million for all of its communication budget for the year. So whatever option is chosen has to fit within that boundary, that criteria. So thinking in those terms, we've generated a good list of interests, but now what are some of the criteria that we might use to evaluate the options that we come up with?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to have accurate information. For instance, up on that first list, we talked about evacuation.
Mm-hmm.
We at ChemPro have a lot of subject matter experts that we could provide to help get out the fact that we really don't want to be evacuating people during a chemical spill. That just
Mhm.
as one example.
Okay.
So we're very interested in getting out that accurate information and then, making sure that people see ChemPro as being associated with accurate, helpful information to the community.
So it almost sounds like it would be making sure that whatever is developed meets, certain industry standards or certain scientific standards.
Yeah, it needs to be accurate,
Okay.
yeah.
Other ideas?
Yeah, I would urge us to move on this as quickly as possible. So, even though we hope this type of event never occurs, and it could be 3 years or more before something like this happens, the sooner we prepare and the sooner we get our community in line to respond properly, the better. We don't want to be surprised because of the unforeseen event happening 3 months from now, for example. And so I would urge us as a group to move forward with some urgency here, and I don't know what the exact deadline ought to be. I'm interested in what the other folks in the room think, but we should do this with some urgency and not treat it as something that's not likely to happen for 10 years. So, sense of urgency.
And I think one thing that could be talked about, one way to think about urgency is which things need to happen first and then which things can happen later.
Mhm.
So part of the criteria might be how do you decide what things are most urgent? Do you have a sense for the things, if you had to think of some things that's just very urgent, what would be really top of the list?
Well, as a first step in terms of super urgent, we need to identify what procedures exist now within the commercial sector in town, within our schools, within the residential sector? I mean, what plans do we have in place today, and where do we not have any plans to respond to such an event? You know, so there could be gaps, there could be preparations that don't meet the need, that were developed some time ago. So we really need to assess what's out there now to respond to this type of disaster in all facets of our community. So first, an assessment of that, of where we are today across various sectors of the community.
So you need to have the ability to do that assessment as a
Yeah.
criteria. If we're going to be thinking about options,
Yes.
one of the criteria is we can actually accomplish this assessment
Right,
in a timely fashion.
yes, with all parties involved. So there's a lot of people who need to have a seat at the table who need to share information with us on that one.
Okay. Other criteria, constraints?
I think whatever is done, making sure that everyone is benefiting from that. And I'm thinking of our programs, making sure that the work programs and vacation times and all of that are taken into consideration when we're scheduling trainings, for example.
Okay.
So that everyone can benefit from that.
So when you're saying everyone, who's included
I think
in
all
that?
the various stakeholders that we've been talking about, whether, again, it's schools. So if we're talking about summertime trainings, for example, that's going to impact because we have different school schedules. You know, people go on vacation in the summertime.
Right.
So again, just taking into consideration the different types of scheduling and being
Yeah.
flexible with that.
So scheduling to maximize participation.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think like in our case, I think the beginning of the school year would probably be the most beneficial. I mean, the longer you get into the school year, we have lots of other things going on, you know, and then when you get into the end of the school year, you know, summer, you know, people are thinking of summer vacation. So, you know, any timing that would go into this, you know, anything that you would want to do, I think would be best.
Coordinate with the school year.
Yeah, early,
Yeah.
you know, as early in the school year as possible.
Okay, so I think, and part of that is gonna be just the coordination piece, Ted, like you were
Mhm.
saying. And later on, when we talk about more specific options that can be operationalized, it might be setting the timing. Right now, let's just think about what are the things we need to be keeping in mind as we're thinking about options. So I think scheduling is good, and your point about coordinating with the different stakeholders in order to make that happen. Other thoughts? I have one. Just coming from a nonprofit, I'm always thinking about funding
Mhm.
and what are our realistic limits on really what can be spent on the great ideas that we're going to come up with. So it's something that I just want us to, I'm sure we all are always thinking about it, just to bear in mind that we don't have limitless resources here. So being really strategic about what we choose to do, given the funding that we might have. Does that
Mhm.
make sense to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Any other parameters we should be bearing in mind as we start moving into the next part of our process?
Time, money, and resources.
Time,
We're-
money, and
Yep,
resources.
so
Okay.
I think we're covered.
It's
People
a
feel
good
pretty,
start.
pretty comfortable? Okay. And again, if something occurs to you as we're talking, we can always add to this list. I'm gonna put this one up on the wall as well, so we can, as we're thinking about options later, when we're evaluating them, we can think about these as our touchstones.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's move on to thinking about options. So we have our interests here up on the board. And options really are possible solutions to meet these interests. Okay, so when we're thinking about options, we're starting to think about solutions, but we're not evaluating them yet. We can withhold our judgment as best we can, just to get as many options on the table as possible. And it's really the value of this part of the process. So really, we're just going to be brainstorming, thinking about what our interests are and thinking about possible ways of meeting them. So I'm gonna stand up again and start to write on the board and just think as creatively as you can about what options could help us meet these interests. I've already heard some, so keep going with that.
Well, we've talked a lot about education, so really training all the stakeholders in the community, whether it be, the folks in the chemical plant, the teachers and administrators in the schools, the healthcare professionals and managers at the senior center. Probably more important to train those folks, educate those folks, than the students in the schools or the elderly folks in the nursing home. It's really key that those stakeholders, those leaders in those facilities are the ones who are going to be really getting people in line and communicating with them when these events occur. So,
Right.
The education needs to be pervasive. It needs to especially focus on those stakeholders and on
Right.
those managers.
Especially the people who are going to be organizing
Right,
folks
exactly.
to move or relocate
Yep.
or stay or what have you. Okay.
Yes,
Thank
exactly.
you.
Mhm.
More options.
Yeah, so along the line of funding and timeliness,
Mhm.
Kempro is a member of our trade association, which has some co-branded materials already developed that we
Okay.
would be more than happy to provide, so as to increase our standing and visibility in the community, and then also to make it easier for folks to get that accurate information that I was referring to earlier.
Okay, so you have access to training materials from Kempro and the chemical.
Trade association
Right.
that we're a very big part of,
Okay.
and they would need to be co-branded.
Okay.
So the other thing that occurred to me, as part of that education effort, we should also plan on exercising within the community, some of those key
Okay.
stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
In in coordination with Kempro, perhaps Louise, you guys can help us out a little bit too with those exercises in the community?
Absolutely, we can provide funding. I am
Okay.
authorized by my management team to help out with this effort. So we do have a budget.
Terrific. Thank you,
We
Louise.
have lovely centers, and we'd be happy to offer those up for, the facilities up for the training
Mhm. Great.
programs. Maybe some of our seniors could participate in that, that'd be great.
Okay, they'd certainly be
Terrific.
welcome.
Thank you.
But I think best for us is it's the technology, use of media. We have a very, we have a good website, the schools.
Mm-hmm.
County school has a good website that explains, when we have if we have early dismissals for whatever reasons. I mean,
Mhm.
we can make, send announcements out to parents.
Okay.
We can send announcements out. So, I mean, if we could, some of this is great, and I mean, probably some printed material would be good, but I think, on our case, the more that we can use websites and technology
Right.
to be able to deliver this, and along with that, getting the media to, making sure that we involve the media
Mhm.
in some of these, in this communication. There's free, you're talking about possibly, we could get some free advertising or free services from our local, media to do that.
Okay, so the option be making sure we leverage web-based applications, social media, the media, to try to sort of be a force multiplier here in getting information out. Okay?
Kempro can provide subject matter experts.
Mhm.
We've been thinking about this for a while, and have some experts who have science-based solutions that they can provide.
Okay. So you have another option is for you to be able to provide some subject matter experts.
Yeah, where
help.
the information needs to be more localized and tailored to the community. We can provide the printed materials in general, but where we need to get more targeted, we do have
Mhm.
people who can work as subject matter experts. And we have media experts as well that we would be happy to provide for this effort.
Okay, thank you very much. Other options to meet interests come to mind for anybody? feel like a good list for now?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Pretty strong start.
All right. Okay, so we've identified some options and we've identified some criteria by which to evaluate the options that we have. Okay, so the next step is going to be taking this long list of options and either reducing it, making it more specific, based on the criteria that you all have come up with. So, one way to start would be to first talk about the options that seem to be the most attractive to the largest number of you, just to see where there's already some support and momentum. We have training stakeholders, ChemPro's offer around accessing training materials, running exercises in the community, leveraging online resources, and also working with SMEs. And here are our criteria: reflecting accurate information, what can we do quickly, what can be done urgently, how can we maximize participation, and what can we do with limited funding.
So it seems that things we'd probably be able to do most quickly would be putting together some training. As you know, Louise already offered from ChemPro's side. They already have some training put together.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me we can get a team together and evaluate that training, make sure it's appropriate for the different audiences who'd be receiving it, and it would be a pretty short effort to put that together. So it seems to me that getting that education out there is number one, the most important thing we can do, probably the quickest thing we can do.
Mm-hmm.
To
Maybe
be-
using some existing materials?
Yeah, because those materials do exist.
Okay.
And that might speed us along. And as I look at this, it might be kind of a multi-tiered plan that stretches out over time. So we get the education out there first, and then the exercises could follow later, and we could use the exercises to validate some procedures, or use the upcoming exercise as a way to kind of vet policies and procedures that are already in place, refine them as we lead into the exercise to kind of address one of those interests that we had earlier, right? About kind of vetting what's already out there, make sure it's
Right.
appropriate for today's environment. So we can link that into the exercise piece, I think,
So
which could follow the training.
the suggestion that I'm hearing from you sort of addresses multiple interests at once, right? So your proposal would be, look at existing training material, see if it's appropriate and can be used, because it's already there,
Mhm.
right? Why
Right,
reinvent the
right.
wheel?
Yep.
Modify it where needed, roll it out, then using some exercises to validate it, and then you're able then to move into making policy.
Mhm,
So
yeah.
that's sort of
Yeah, that's pretty accurate
Okay.
summary of that.
okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm interested in other thoughts about that as a starting plan.
Well, I know, I think, what Ted had said, and I think, it's great that Louise has offered up. But I think that really, we need to make sure that we're communicating one message. So when you talk about convening a team, I think that's a very important option to bring in, all of the players so that we're putting out one message. So that we're not duplicating, so that the county's not saying one thing, the chemical company's not saying something else. That we really have one message,
Yeah.
that we're not confusing the community, and that we're seen as a one comprehensive plan for responding. Using
Yeah.
using their professional resources, using your management skills with emergency planning.
Okay. So the modification you would make is to make sure that the plans are coordinated and that it's one single set of instructions, one single kind of protocol for people, so it's consistent and clear across the stakeholders. Okay.
Well, if you can let me know how many of these pamphlets and materials you need, I'm sure I can get the funding, and we can start distributing these co-branded materials pretty quickly.
Okay.
We have the funding to do that.
That's great, and it sounds like there's some interest in the group for
Oh,
for
absolutely,
doing that.
yes.
Okay. Other thoughts about evaluating these options? So we've got, so starting with training the stakeholders using this material, sort of our first one.
Yeah.
And then coordinating it, as per Steve's comment. And then from there, moving into some exercises to try to get people actually using the material, actually trying things out, seeing what it's like.
And I would want to make sure that we have some ChemPro subject matter experts involved in the planning of those exercises. We have a lot of experience
Mhm.
with spills and some best practices that we could share.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So at this point, we've got sort of a good start of a plan. Obviously, there are more details that need to be worked through, but are people generally comfortable with starting with getting some training going, getting materials, getting training, and then running some exercises a way forward on this topic?
I think you have to map it out. I mean, first, don't just jump into thinking that, I think there has to be a real strong plan mapped out first,
Okay.
based on who's going to do what.
Right.
Recognize looking at what our needs are, looking at what our seniors' needs are. We
So-
know that our chemical company's really willing to put this forward, but I think the ultimate responsibility lies in our emergency management folks for public safety.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to jump in here. For the purpose of the activity today, I agree with you. We do need a detailed plan. For the purpose of the activity and our time that we have, let's maybe just assign someone to make that detailed plan. Start talking about what are the next. Maybe just decide what are the next steps.
Mhm.
Who's going to do what, and when will you meet next?
Okay.
Just for the purpose of
Right.
our exercise at this
Okay.
point.
All right, so we've decided that we need to have a plan. Thank you very much for that. Who would like to take the lead on just mapping out what we've talked about here?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
Ted.
I'll do
terrific.
that, yep. So we'll identify a cross-functional team. I'll put together a task list or a Gantt chart and follow that order, Samantha, that you've identified there, that we've all agreed to in terms of vetting and developing the training, moving on to exercises, and having a consistent communication plan to support all those activities.
Okay. And Ted, what's a timeline do you think is realistic for you to complete that plan?
Yeah, give me 2 weeks or so, and I'd like us to convene again as a team. So, what's today? Today's Tuesday. A week from Friday.
Okay. So that would be meeting on the, I don't know what day that is, but we're gonna meet a week from Friday.
Yeah, and then we can get together on the 15th of next month and look at that plan and make any
Okay.
revisions from within this team, and then begin our outreach and identify some other participants in the plan.
Okay, so you're gonna have that plan ready for the meeting on
Yes.
5:15?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, all right. In terms of getting the materials together, from ChemPro, what seems like a realistic timeline for you, Louise, to get that together?
It's just a matter of finding out how many it's pamphlets that we mostly have as printed material, but then we also have some other materials that can go up on the web and elsewhere. So
Well,
it's
it
just a
seems
matter
like-
of getting the
yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, can you share that with us? at
Yeah,
the-
maybe just bring some samples to the meeting?
Sure.
Yeah, before you
Okay.
order too many or spend
Yeah.
any money.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else we need to do at the outset here before the meeting in 2 weeks? Seem okay?
good.
All right, and who can send out the scheduler to get the meeting on everyone's calendars?
I'll do that as well.
Okay.
Yep.
And Ted, do you think you can maybe do that in the next day or so?
Yeah, give me 2 days on that.
Okay. Okay. So just to recap, Ted's going to take the lead on mapping out the plan with sort of a draft chart to get the timeline going. He's going to have 2 weeks for that, and he's going to bring it. Well, can you send it out in advance of the
Yeah,
meeting
sure,
on the
yeah,
5?
absolutely, yeah, it'll be done before the meeting, so I'll send it out.
Okay, send it
I'll
out with some
PDF it.
advance notice.
Yeah.
Louise, you're going to bring some sample materials.
I could send those out ahead of time. We have them in PDFs
Okay.
as well, so I'd be happy to share those ahead of the meeting.
That'd be great. Thank you. And Ted, you're going to go ahead and send the scheduler for the meeting on the 15th.
Correct.
Okay.
Mhm.
Anything else that needs to be done at this stage? And what I can do is I can type this up and send this back out too, so we
Okay.
all can have access to that for the future meeting.
All right.
Okay? All right. Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate your input, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work on this issue with all of you. So,
Thank you.
thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you, thanks all.
Great, well, you guys all did a great job in the activity. Thanks for being good sports and going with your role. So just take some time to debrief. I'd like to ask the Red Cross mobilizers how it was for them. How did you feel? What was the process like for you?
It was good to do. I always am interested to hear the different perspectives that people have, and I think there's always room to dig a little deeper and to find out what's going on for people. So it was great to have the different perspectives and be able to explore those.
What about for the participants? How did you feel? Did you feel heard? Did you feel validated? What was this process like for you?
No, I thought it was good. I thought there were some really good interactions. I think sometimes we kind of sat and waited for somebody, to say something, but people did jump in, and there wasn't a whole lot of silence, silent time. People were able to feel, comfortable enough to be able to express themselves.
Well, I think Samantha did a nice job of facilitating, and kept it going. So if there were those times of silence, it was, people were, I think, were thinking about the topic and the issue we were discussing.
Yeah, I think it provided us with really a structured means around which to arrive at these decisions, to agree on the issues, the criteria, and then agree on the decision. So it was really a pretty structured conversation. I thought as a group we held pretty tight to the 6 steps, so.
And I would just say, as a facilitator, a little bit of silence is okay.
Right.
Because that doesn't mean often people are thinking, and sometimes, people take a longer time to respond than other people do. So sometimes if you let it hang a little bit, you might hear from the people who might be a little quieter or, not the folks who jump in. So I would just say for whoever else is facilitating these, it's okay if it's quiet sometimes too.
I would say that also I felt like we respected the process, that, for instance, not to evaluate our options. We really did just put out the options. There might have been a few things on there. As a member of a group, I would have wanted to jump in and start having some judgments about, but I think the process kept us on point.
That's hard, right? It's hard not to jump
Yeah.
right to, even early, once I start identifying interests even, I'm like, oh, I'm already thinking about solutions, let's just jump to it. That's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think you get a richer dialogue when you,
Mhm.
when you follow the steps and you see that it does give you ample time to
Mhm.
flesh out what you
Mhm.
would want to say, and it doesn't do the thing that judgment does, which is it shuts down
Right.
ideas that you might not have thought of otherwise.
Exactly. I mean, imagine if we had the interests and Samantha had gotten three of those interests up on the board before you started doing, creating options and solutions and documenting them. What would have happened though, but we forgot about these other pieces, and those aren't included in the solution. So what happens, you move forward with the solution, then later down the road, maybe months later, these interests that weren't identified then come up, and you have to kind of start from the beginning again. So this is one of the things that helps you to get it all out on the table right away, so you don't have to redo a lot of work that you've already done later down the road.
And I think also getting it up on paper is really helpful, so you can keep track of
Mhm.
what you've talked about, and so the group can as well. It's hard to keep all of that, in your mind all at once.
Absolutely.
It's just impossible to do, really.
Absolutely. It's also a good way to check to make sure everyone's heard it, right?
Mhm.
Some people might say an option, but someone may not have heard it. But if it's on the board, you can also read it later when you're looking at it. Great. Any other observations or points that come up for you? Any burning issues?
There's that
So
long silence.
what- and that's okay. I think there's a possibility when this is done with the role play that there could be concerns that come up around some of the statements that the chemical plant manager makes around representing the company. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that emerged and then people maybe were using some intervention skills around managing that. I could imagine people being concerned that maybe some of the statements are self-serving for the chemical company, or that they may not trust the chemical company to provide information on what's safe and what's not safe and that sort of thing. So I could imagine that being an issue, and so I wouldn't be surprised for facilitators if that comes up, and it's a good place to use your intervention skills to manage that conversation constructively and not alienate the chemical plant engineer role player, and make sure that people feel heard.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I think we're ready to move into our final session.
Great, thank you.
All right, great, thanks.